Matt Kibbe here, your host at Kibbe on Liberty. The building behind me is where the Mont Pelerin Society meeting is being held. This, of course, is a famous gathering of mostly Austrian economists founded by Friedrich Hayek. It is also the place where, in 1944, the so-called Bretton Woods Agreement was hatched up by the infamous John Maynard Keynes and a guy named Harry Dexter White, who was a Treasury official under FDR, later discovered to be a Soviet spy. So you can imagine how this central plan to control our currency turned out in the long run. It was the death knell to the gold standard, and it has created all sorts of chaos ever since. I'm going to be talking to some of the brightest brains here, not just about monetary policy, not just about the Bretton Woods Agreement, but where liberty was then, where it is today, and how we move forward. Check it out. Dan, how's it going?
Great, man.
We are in the middle of nowhere in New Hampshire at the Mont Pelerin Society. Yeah. I don't know if these are sacred grounds or haunted grounds.
Yeah, I'd imagine haunted would be more of the liberal perspective. Bretton Woods system sort of founded and or manipulated here.
Yeah, and a lot of people that think about monetary policy from an Austrian perspective point to Bretton Woods. Henry Hazlitt very famously critiqued it in real time. But I go back all the way to the Whiskey Rebellion because the tax that Hamilton convinced Washington to impose on the great distillers in Pennsylvania was used to finance the First National Bank. So I feel like we lost the Republic long before Bretton Woods.
I would defer to you on that. I'm not a monetary historian. I'm actually more familiar with like coinage in ancient Greece than I am the American monetary system.
Well, that'll be a different show.
Sure.
But you are here representing the fairly new, if not brand new, Stephenson Institute at Wabash College, Stephenson Institute for Classical Liberalism.
That's right.
And I want to dig into those last two words on that. Sure. But what's the when did this start?
So the institute itself, I believe, was founded thanks to a gift from your friend of mine, Richard Stephenson, in 2021. Last year, so 2021-22 academic year was the first year that I was at Wabash College. So they founded the center, they gave it the title, and then they searched for a director, someone to sort of like design original programming and get things up and running. And sort of set the vision for the organization. And so it's been a great treat. I think while it's a new initiative in and of itself in the branding of Stephenson Institute, et cetera, it's more of like a homecoming. I think a lot of people don't realize the critical role Wabash College played in classical liberalism in the United States in the 20th century. So you've got powerhouse Ben Rogie, huge mover and shaker, collaborator with Leonard Read over at the Foundation for Economic Education, also collaborating with people like Milton Friedman. So Capitalism and Freedom, the sort of canonical text of the pop classical liberal movement, was actually designed as a sequence of lectures to be delivered at Wabash College. Furthermore, faculty members like Baldy Harper were on staff in similar time periods as Ben Rogie. Baldy Harper went on to found the Institute for Humane Studies. Alumni and benefactor Pierre Goodrich, founder of Liberty Fund, originally designed the Goodrich Reading and Seminar Room, which is part of the library at Wabash College, which has his sort of architectural vision of classical liberalism and its relationship to, say, liberal arts and Western civilization and the sort of like grand intention of higher education through the liberal vision etched in stone on the walls. So
I didn't realize was Rogie Ben Rogie the epicenter of drawing all of those powerhouses to Wabash?
I mean, these things are really hard to discern just by like archival materials and written stuff. But John Van Sickle was also on staff, and John Van Sickle was critical in helping Mises and Hayek emigrate out of Europe into the United States during World War II. And so I would say Van Sickle and Rogie together were very critical players in sort of promoting, fostering, and sponsoring the classical liberal perspective at the time. Definitely more communicators and educators and sort of administrative functions in the educational system, more so than, say, like a Friedman, a core researcher, Nobel laureate, or a theorist like Mises or Hayek or anything like that. They were like sort of on the ground mover shakers more so.
Yeah, this is something that appeals to me, particularly with Rogie. And, he's not someone that wrote a lot. And I think that the one book that I'm thinking of, and perhaps the only book, was really just a collection of lectures, because he was a storyteller. He wasn't an academic the way that you would think about a Hayek lecture.
Yeah. So Can Capitalism Survive? And then there's the Liberty Fund edition of A Maverick's Guide to Freedom is the sort of title that they put on. And if you look at them, a lot of them are sort of like similar themed, like dinner presentations, like a message to the donors and the network of Foundation for Economic Education, or a comment on a critical strategic pivot in some dedicated organization's goal or mission. So, but even though the writings that Rogie produced are relatively sparse, The Incredible Bread Machine is sort of like this really fun video we hosted on the website for the Institute. Shows a pretty nuanced and sophisticated understanding about sort of unintended consequences in public policy and the sort of like influence and framework of classical liberalism at the time. But then also, he has a very keen eye for strategy and the role of these organizations in fostering the broader relevance of classical liberalism in American culture at the time. But then also, like, just his definitional clarity on what classical liberalism is. He's got this quote that it's an end of innocence philosophy, and that it forces us to reckon with the idea that there will be no New Jerusalem. And he makes the proto-Hayekian point about the reality of our society's progress has been largely unplanned, which puts strong parameters and limitations on what it is that we can hope to design in terms of a great society.
I suppose for my audience, we should, and I point this out all the time, but if you're new to this show, when you say the word liberal or liberalism, you're talking about the classical version, which meant free. Yeah. Freedom, respect for civil institutions, and allowing people to thrive as long as they don't hurt people or take their stuff.
Yeah, I think, I think that there's sort of two ways that classical liberalism gets, or just say liberalism proper in this sense, gets defined. One is through the starting point of political philosophy or political theory, which would be as a standard for assessing the justice and sort of virtue of a society. That we would judge society A against society B and ask which one is sort of better based on which one is more free. But actually, I think classical liberalism as an intellectual tradition has a more nuanced and more profound uniqueness than just as one of many possible political philosophies. So the typical comparison against liberalism would be something like egalitarianism, like society A versus society B. We would ask which one's more equal. But classical liberalism, especially surrounding the Scottish Enlightenment, is basically responsible for inventing social science. And so my favorite definition of liberalism is Mises's, where he's like, it's the application of science to the social life of man. So liberalism in that framework is liberty, as you say it, is more of a conclusion. It's, hey, here's how human nature shapes our choices and opportunity set for how we live our lives. And that means something about the predictable outcomes of when people associate and group together and interact. And liberty or thick appreciations for people's freedom, individuality, and diversity is just really important to help society function in that sense. As opposed to, well, this is my presumption first principle, and now I'm going to sort of backward engineer what I want society to look like. It's a subtle difference, but I would argue classical liberalism is more of an intellectual tradition than it is a traditional political philosophy. In some sense, it sort of breaks the mold of conventional political philosophies.
Yeah, I know there's this ongoing debate amongst Austrian economists, and the Venn diagram overlay between classical liberals, libertarians, and Austrian economists is almost 100%. Mm-hmm. But these are in some sense two separate things.
Well, and in many ways, like, that observation is to some extent getting a little bit outdated. So it used to be like, okay, well, if Austrian economics is so positive and non-normative, it's just descriptive and purely scientific, then why is it that so many of them share a political ideology of, say, libertarianism or classical liberalism? But funny enough, I mean, in the last 20 years, we've gotten all sorts of like amalgamations of what modern liberalism or modern libertarian movements entail, including the Bleeding Heart folks and sort of libertarianism. And so in some sense, it used to be a common anecdote to be like, well, why are there no Austrian socialists, or why are there no Austrian Democrats? And it's like, I mean, have you looked around? The majority of self-identified classical liberals are sort of, I would say, like, probably registered Democrats. It wouldn't be crazy to recognize a lot of people, especially in the academy now, who would be self-identified appreciators of an intellectual tradition, but who are also voting on the left side of the aisle as much as the right.
Yeah.
I don't really know if one is necessarily better than the other per se, but I don't think the accusation of these things necessarily being corrupting or always correlated with one another is holding as strongly as it did maybe in the 1970s or 1980s.
At Kibbe on Liberty, freedom is a lifestyle 24/7, something you live and breathe and wear every day. If that describes you, you need the very best Liberty swag in the market today, just like this shirt I happen to be wearing. Go to freethepeople.org/KOL and check out our exciting merch. You too can love liberty and look cool. Yeah, I mean, I could see it, and you discover these sort of splinter groups, and I love splinter groups because I believe in infinite variations on a theme, and I struggle, like, I don't even like labels so much, and I don't like using isms, even when it's one of my favorite isms, but there is, like, you can imagine a communitarian version that is very much inspired by Hayek and Mises, not only methodological individualism, but understanding emergent order from people with purpose and choice, making decisions in a radically uncertain world. And that's how I think about it. But I just know that if whatever ism doesn't want that process to happen, is destructive. And that's what defines my libertarianism. But I could see communitarianism. I could see, like, you could theoretically be, this will upset everybody watching this, but you could theoretically be a democratic socialist and appreciate this process, as long as you don't think that you can use violence to restructure that process.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting observation, and one that a lot of professional academics probably come across a lot, because there are a lot of people, or maybe it's a symptom of our modern times, where all organizational or institutional participation are settings and microcosms of the broader society, and therefore stages and venues for applying or adopting the praxis of your vision of justice and social justice. And so I've met a lot of sort of old guard academics who I think politically would be like Marxist or dyed-in-the-wool, thoroughgoing left-wing socialists. But when it comes to the internal operations of their colleges or universities, it's a live and let live, let a thousand flowers bloom. Like, you don't tell me what to say or what to do.
By the way, the one thing that Mao said, he didn't mean it, but the one thing that he said that makes me a Maoist is let a thousand flowers bloom.
Yeah.
And then he killed you, but that part I don't agree with so much.
But it does seem like maybe an explicit or implicit implication of many varieties of modern social theory are that like you can't have an appreciation for openness and freedom within an internal organization because you have a responsibility to sort of like implement social change at the broader scale. I think that's hard to work with.
Yeah. Politics ruins everything because the problem with grand designs is, and you can appreciate this spontaneous emergence of culture and social institutions and people solving problems in an uncertain world. But then if you want to start tinkering, you have to interrupt that process. Right. And it's, to me, like I think about it quite simplistically, like there's cooperation and then there's violence. Mm-hmm. And these are two paradigms that really don't mix together. And that sort of gets at the values of the Stephenson Institute, because you lay out these pretty fundamental principles, and I love talking about it at the principle level because it's not political at all. Mm-hmm. And these are just what I would consider common sense human values, the kind of stuff that your mom taught you when you were beaten on your brother, and she's like, "Don't hurt him, don't take his stuff."
I was the younger brother, so it was typically the other way around.
You're the victim.
But the voluntary coercive dichotomy that you lay out, I think, is important. In the wake of Elinor Ostrom's Nobel, there's been this sort of like renewed appreciation for civil society, a sort of like Tocquevillian extension of, hey, churches and nonprofit groups and clubs and all of these sort of organizations that don't fit the mold of profit seeking in the marketplace or governmentally subsidized are sort of forgotten or ignored by a very rigid conventional model of political economy. And I think there's a valid point to be made there, but it's sort of a reactionary point. I worry a lot that a focus and the semantics of civil society ignores this role of voluntariness that you're observing, because if you go back to Smith, truck barter exchange, rape, pillage, and plunder, the voluntary distinction captures the third environment, right? Civil society is part of just voluntary behaviors. So the profit-seeking element and the government fiscal subsidy element is sort of a red herring that's ignoring this more foundational element. And so Dick Cornell, Lenore Ely is here at Mont Pelerin this weekend. Her and I have been in a pretty extended conversation because Ben Rogie also shared this appreciation for the terminology of the independent sector. And the independent sector invokes, I think, more this appreciation for voluntarism, this protection against influence and intervention by central authority. And so, again, early mid-20th century, there were vibrant discussions across the smaller colleges and private institutions about whether or not they were going to take federal funding, about what that would mean, how accreditation would potentially corrupt curriculum. And Wabash College, Ben Rogie were at the heart of a lot of those debates and discussions.
Recently, and I think this was a Mont Pelerin meeting at Francisco Marroquin in Guatemala City, I only recently learned that Ben Rogie was very much part of the drafting of the business plan for this fabulous classical liberal institution, and of all places, Guatemala. And I tell people that exists, and they're like, what? Yeah. What?
I fully admit I didn't know any of that institutional history until I talked to Lenore about it as well. Yeah. I mean, basically, I think Richard Epstein is here as well, runs a similar classical liberal center at New York University. I mean, right when I started emailing people and including my new byline, I mean, everybody has these sort of like, not everybody, but the older cohort of classical liberal scholars definitely have just these war chests of stories regarding Ben Rogie and long debates and continual correspondence and stuff. So he definitely served a very important role in the movement at the time.
Thank you for joining me today on Kibbe on Liberty and for being part of our fiercely independent audience. Every week, my organization, Free the People, partners with BlazeTV to bring you this show. My guests bring smart perspectives on everything from current events to timeless philosophical debates. If you like what you hear, Go to freethepeople.org/KOL and support Kibbe on Liberty so we can continue to produce these honest conversations with interesting people. Now, let's get back to it. I'm gonna give you a gift today. Don't hurt people and don't take their stuff. The most popular T-shirt we make, and there's a method to this madness. You don't know this, but the reason that I hurriedly told you, hey, can you do this today instead of tomorrow? We were going to talk tomorrow. You're sitting where Vernon Smith was going to sit, and he canceled at the last minute. So no
big shoes to fill.
Yeah, no pressure at all. But you're repping for a Nobel laureate right now. But the origins of that shirt, I think, go back to 2010, and I was listening to Vernon Smith give it off the cuff talk about Adam Smith and the theory of moral sentiments, which has really dominated the last 10, 15 years of his research, because he's trying to understand his technical economic research and the games and all that stuff, and he's finding answers in Adam Smith. And out of that lecture, me being I'm not particularly smart, but if I hear something, maybe I could translate it into something that would make sense to me. So I'm like, 700 pages, theory of moral sentiments, don't hurt people and don't take their stuff. And maybe there's a footnote to that, maybe, but that's my version of Adam Smith. And I'm going somewhere with this, believe it or not. In a lot of ways, when I reread Ben Rogie, just in the last 5 years, I realized that his mission was to translate really substantial, complex, difficult economic concepts into something that would resonate with people around the dinner table. And I want to read this quote because it sort of has become my mantra. Ben Rogie, I think it's from Can Capitalism Survive? If capitalism is to survive, it must defend itself in the arena of values and emotions. We can't just put up a slide of a downward sloping demand curve. We can't just put up a spreadsheet that shows the utility maximizing nature of market processes. We have to make a pitch for people that this thing is beautiful. Liberty is beautiful. The process of discovering your own life is that the journey is everything. And I think I see that in the mission statement at the Stephenson Institute. I think
so hearing you quote Ben, Rogie on that margin, I can't help but think that the one thing that we haven't really focused on in the discussion thus far, tragically, is his role as an educator. And the community and residential campus of Wabash College, insofar as, so Rogie never wanted his coursework to be required curriculum for a major credit or anything like that. He wanted students to have to want to enroll and volitionally choose. So
interesting.
The notion, which it resonates so much with me, because as a professional academic, you get engaged in all these conversations that are really technical about pedagogy and curricular design. And similar to planning a great society, everything looks great on paper when you assume that nothing ever goes wrong and everybody has a shared vision and is on the same page, and you have to take course 101 before 201 and so on and so forth. But particularly amongst, I think, the free market cohort of educators, there's a common advice that assume that the class that you have students in is the only class that you're ever going to see them in, and the only class in economics that they're ever going to take. You can't take for granted that they've got a background and know all of the sort of simple material ahead of time, and you have to sort of meet them where they're at. And I think that Rogie's sentiments in the quote that you read sort of echo that if you challenge the notion of pedagogy, the relevant thing that separates successful students from unsuccessful students is a wantonness to learn. So part of our responsibility as educators or communicators of ideas, whether it's in the classroom formally or you're just sort of a spokesperson and trying to have a podcast or influence in that way, you need to inspire people to recognize the importance, the profundity, the beauty of the thing it is that they're trying to understand. And so, if you genuinely find compelling the insights of free market economics and classical liberalism, they're literally tools that unlock the social universe. They help you make sense of the world that you live in. They help you navigate your personal life, most likely your professional life and profit seeking and sort of entrepreneurial endeavors as well. And if you are enthusiastic and inspirational in that role, I think students sort of lighten up and sort of fall in love with the business of ideas themselves. And I think that Ben Rogie understood that very well.
He was a teacher, and you like the entire world of academia typically requires intellectuals to teach as well. But I've noticed that there's two types of professors. I'm grossly simplifying here, and that those who sort of phone it in, they show up, they probably give the same lecture they've given 1,000 times, and those who actually try to connect with students and turn them on and get them excited about something. And you can see, I'm not going to name any names, particularly people that are still alive, but you can see the legacy of those professors that take teaching seriously. And Ben Rogie, like you and I know this story. My friend Dick Stephenson, who is the inspiration for your institute, he got turned on to this stuff by Ben Rogie, and eventually found himself in the Mises seminar in New York City. He somehow got into the Rand circle. I don't know if he got kicked out, which was quite typical at the time, but he was so inspired by this stuff, and then he went on to be a very successful man. But most professors don't do that, and I think that's part of what you guys are trying to accomplish. You want to turn people on.
Yeah, and I think maybe there was something distinctive about Rogie's style himself, or the sort of like
he was a comedian. Wabash. He was a comedian.
Yeah,
he's funny as hell.
But in meeting alumni, having been a part of the college community for about a year now, the number of people like Dick who had this sort of like transformative experience by means of interacting with Ben, and the particular nature of the types of stories that they share is like very similar. It's, well, Professor Rogie got me accepted to the summer seminar at the Foundation for Economic Education. But coming off a farm in Indiana, I had never been to New York State or New York City or traveled anywhere outside of the state. And so, like 2 weeks left of the semester, Professor Rogie came in, he took out his wallet and he gave me $200 and he said, "You're going to need to buy yourself a train ticket and get yourself to New York by 3 weeks from Tuesday." And then he turned, and then he paused, and he turned back, and he took out another $100, and he put it on the table, and he said, "And stop by Manhattan and have yourself a good time on the way back." And so Wabash College only has a single behavioral rule for our students, and it's be a gentleman always. Many of your viewers probably unaware, Wabash College is only one of 2 all-male undergraduate institutions left in the United States. Hampton-Sydney College, another sort of powerhouse of classical liberalism as well in their economics department. And we just have the single rule: be a gentleman always. And it's very inspired by, call it Tocquevillian or liberal, just this notion that in order to learn how to be an adult, it requires an opportunity for failure. It requires a sort of like open experimentation of how to conduct oneself and how to judge for oneself the propriety of behavior. And I meet alums, and they're people in their 80s now who it still means so much to them that when they turned 18 and got to be a part of this institution, that they were treated with respect and dignity as adults for the first time. and that has sort of like left this lasting impression on them for decades thereafter.
Yeah, there's a sense of community that that I discovered when I went to my first Foundation for Economic Education summer seminar, and I had been at Grove City College, so there were at least a few of us that were interested in ideas and interested in the engine that propelled civil society. But it was incredibly transformative to me to discover that there were in fact dozens more of us at FEE. And one of the programs that it sounds like there's not as much of this as there used to be. The summer seminar, you were bringing young people to Wabash.
Yeah. So week-long intensive seminar. I mean, the idea is that, again, Pierre Goodrich had a vision, sort of galvanized in the architectural schematics for the Goodrich Seminar Room. You can learn more about the particular architectural vision on Liberty Fund's website. But it's the idea that the most meaningful influence on the long arc of human civilization is individual liberty and human freedom. And that if you want to understand what it means to be a person in our society, requires a thorough understanding of what liberty is, what its causes and consequences are, and then how to promote and protect it. Liberal arts, right? The art of being free. I try to tell students, like, martial arts are to ninjas as the liberal arts are to free individuals. And so I first attended IHS and FEE and all of these sort of summer seminars and was blown away because it was so refreshing, because there was a consistent thread across the faculty. So you'd have a comparative literature faculty, a political science faculty, an econ faculty, a historian, and then, but each of them had this sort of like core insight of, well, we're really interested in what the treatment and understanding of freedom is in this material, these theories, these research, these findings. And the college campus of the late 20th century is almost schizophrenic on this issue. Students take classes in different departments and lose sight of any sort of like cumulative or complementary insights across the departments. And so the summer seminar is just an opportunity to connect those dots in real time for students, to put those different disciplinary backgrounds, but with a shared appreciation of liberty, in the same room with one another, so that students can draw on all of that different expertise.
If you've made it this far into the show, it means I must be doing something right. Kibbe on Liberty is just one of the amazing products we create at Free the People. We tell emotionally compelling stories and produce educational videos for the liberty curious. Our award-winning documentaries personalize all things liberty, independence, creativity, hard work, integrity, and perseverance. After the show, check out our work at freethepeople.org. And if you like what you see, donate to support what we do. That's freethepeople.org. Now back to the show. So what does the curriculum look like on a practical level?
So typically, or last year was the first year that we had it. In the future, I think we're going to be collaborating with the American Institute for Economic Research. They have a broader stretch of like on-call faculty, as well as an online reach for advertising for student attendees. But it's a very straightforward program with multiple lectures in the morning, lunch break, lectures in the evening, discussion, breakout groups, intensive Q&A, and then the thing that I always found really, really endearing about it, again, is sort of the roguey insight that nobody has to be there, right? It's all of the insightful value of a college experience with none of the downside. There's no tests, and there's no homework, there's no formal assignments. It's a group of people self-sorted for a shared interest in a particular subject matter, who are clearly nerdy about it in a sufficient margin to give up a week of their summer and sort of travel to somewhere strange and just focus on asking and discussing this one topic.
So unlike mandatory classwork, it's
Yeah.
it's voluntary. I see a theme here.
Yeah. I mean,
Freedom, not coercion.
yeah. Let people express their preferences, I would say, is sort of like the correlate to, like, I don't like telling people what not to do.
Right.
But things that I think are great about being alive and being informed and in participating in the life of the mind and the professional academy is you can do anything. I never really got that into video games, but like a lot of the young people are really high on them at the moment. And it's like, if you made a video game that had the parameters of reality, people would think it was amazing. And so it's bizarre to me that people want to play video games instead of participate in reality. But like Minecraft is essentially the same thing. It's like, oh, so there's all these blocks and you can build anything. And I'm like, well, you can do that here too.
You could do that in the analog world.
Yeah.
So it strikes me that, and sometimes I struggle with this, particularly over the last 3 or 4 years, where I think there's been a lot of devastatingly bad decisions made that were bad for people and hurt the most vulnerable among us. But classical liberalism, to me, is ultimately a wildly optimistic philosophy. We can work through this, provided that people are free enough to be allowed to solve problems, and you're not sort of predetermining where they're going to end up. Mm-hmm. Are you an optimist?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, my first reaction when you were speaking is like, well, what other choice do we have?
Yeah.
I think I'm a realist in classical liberalism insofar as like the public choice tradition, where we insist upon behavioral symmetry between governments and the private sector. That, well, there's no closet filled with pod people who aren't self-interested that we have the convenience to staff all of our public bureaucracies and office holders with, right? If it seems nonsensical to say, okay, well, people in the market, they're driven by profit, but people in political office, they're driven by altruism. No, it's the same people. So if we have a problem, like whatever it is, I mean, it means someone has to do something to fix or improve upon it. I don't know what that looks like. I don't know all the answers to every form of complaint that people could have, but it seems like the structure and the sort of conditional factors for how people solve problems effectively would be where to start. And I think that, this is very a sort of like Hayek-inspired approach to the question, is like, rather than look at like the ingredient list of the recipe, look at the processes. Look at, are we allowing for openness? Are we allowing for experimentation? Are we allowing for good error correction, updating, feedback? How do we learn new things? How do we make sure that we're paying attention and receptive to supporting the people who have ideas and proposals for finding solutions to problems?
This gets to the Rogie question, and I can't say that particular essay was necessarily optimistic. He was expressing substantial anxiety that people don't appreciate the process that you're describing. They don't necessarily have faith that if you let free people work things out, that you'll get the outcomes. And this is a fundamental dilemma that I think our side has, because the other side, left, right, whatever, comes up with a plan. Yeah. I'm going to do something. And we just went through this with the pandemic and the lockdowns. Whatever the lockdowns were not, and I think they were a colossal humanitarian failure, it was a plan. And someone stood up and said, I have a plan. We have a hard time explaining the potential of not having a central plan.
Yeah, so this past semester I've been teaching a class on the political economy of crisis and response. And so we started the semester by rereading Hayek's Road to Serfdom. And so a lot of the way you're paraphrasing Ben Rogie is just perfect echo of Hayek's insights therein, where, I mean, Hayek's basically saying that the big problem with 20th century political ideology is impatience, that the progress of liberalism just wasn't fast enough. It didn't solve every problem that we could possibly hope it to solve. And so this notion that why would we wait around for subtle change and unplanned free people to fix things when we have the power and potential and plans to make improvements at the margin? And once you sort of allow for that, right, especially if you're ignorant to the fact that you're going to fail and fall short in the plans and then inspire unintended consequences and then reinstigate the entire process all over again, which means intervention begets intervention.
Fix the thing you broke.
Right, yeah. Right. It has this entropy to it. And so I think like one response is that, well, like in the American system, federalist checks and balances and constitutions are basically ways to put fail safes and say, look, like here's a realm of things that we just like don't really respect government to participate in. And I think so. Right after I have students and myself reread Road to Serfdom, we go on to Bob Higgs's Crisis and Leviathan. And so in Higgs's view, again, there's like where Hayek is saying the kernel of the problem was in this ideological shift in the changing definitions of freedom and the general attitudes of impatience for liberalism. Higgs is saying that, well, it's that cultural and ideological component where you would need to have the potential to fend off this sort of inevitable ratchet and growth of large-scale government. I think a lot of people typically take this insight to really self-validate their particular strategy of like, well, I'm going to start the Stephenson Institute, or I'm going to start Free the People, and like this is what we need everybody to do. But again, it's like no one of the answers is necessarily the answer. I think the answer is in the fact that we're going to have dozens of different people pursuing different strategies of promoting a culture of protecting freedom.
Let a thousand flowers bloom. Yeah. So I have to point out that we're at the Mont Pelerin Society meeting. And it's come a long way because I understand they're actually going to live stream a number of the keynote addresses. And it used to be kind of a secret thing, I think born out of the fact that it was literally founded in some of the darkest days of Europe on a mountaintop in Switzerland, Mont Pelerin, surrounded by fascists and socialists and Marxists and all these violent isms that I was talking about. And in that sense, I suppose we can be optimistic because we're not hiding, we're broadcasting, and we're going to tell people about this stuff. I think that for all of my short-term pessimism, I also have to be an optimist because we survived that. So this seems easier, maybe.
Yeah. I've heard there's lots of like sort of like competing and overlapping pieces of lore surrounding Mont Pelerin. I know that Hayek thought we needed a venue to have the greatest and most important social debates of our time. Essentially, I take that comment as something along the lines of like, well, what filled the broadcast airwaves of either the news or even public intellectual commentary, like wasn't really grappling with like socialism versus capitalism. And this was something, if you're going to recognize that there's a cultural component to social change and the growth of government or the lack of freedom, then a purely elite-driven intellectual class simply won't do, right? You need the stakes of a free society compared to a planned society to be understood and appreciated by as many people as you possibly can in that sense. So without some meaningful cultural institution to take up the responsibility to say, like, well, how are we going to curate content and promote that? Like, I've heard some people describe it that he envisioned it to be like television debates, like whoever the leading socialist thinker is and the leading capitalist thinker is in the world, like we're going to put them on TV and broadcast it nationally. So it's ironic if it's the case that like only this year are we finally getting around to live streaming MPS. Like, what have we been doing?
Yeah, we're still not allowed to tweet apparently, or X.
Well,
do we? I don't know what it is anymore.
Yeah, I should clarify. I'm not a formal member of MPS, and there's a lot of the sort of like internal policies that, in my opinion, are just more complicated than like I am capable of committing to memory at the moment. But
I love spontaneous order personally, but so if the last question. So if someone is watching this and they have a child that's ready to dig into this, how do you get into the summer seminar or other programs at the Stephenson Institute?
Sure. Well, our campus events during the academic year are always open to the public. So if you happen to be in Crawfordsville, Indiana, be sure to check our event calendar on our website, which is if you just go to wabash.edu and search the Stephenson Institute for Classical Liberalism, it'll come up. The summer seminar will have a registration page. It's a pretty simplistic application process about explain what role freedom has.
And is it for undergrads? Is that
undergraduates? If you have recently graduated, we can review your case and make exceptions on a case-by-case basis. Ideally, we have the capacity for sort of scaling and increasing the program more generally. So whereas right now the theme is basically just the classical liberal tradition, it's designed to be a intensive week-long seminar in lieu of a semester's worth of curriculum if you were to take a class on classical liberalism at the undergraduate level. With increased interest and more engagement in the future, we can do thematic seminars on Austrian economics or the Chicago School of Economics, or on and on and on down the line of like particular sub-areas of core theory.
I have a request. I'd love to see the seminar on the nexus between the Big Lebowski and Hayek's understanding of spontaneous order.
I know at least 3 faculty that we could staff that with.
Okay, let's do this. Okay, that was ridiculous. So let's end it there. Thank you so much.
It's been super fun. Thanks so much.
Cool.
Yeah.
Thanks for watching. If you liked the conversation, make sure to like the video, subscribe, and also ring the bell for notifications. And if you want to know more about Free the People, go to freethepeople.org.